The shuttle doors hissed open and Danny Reeves stepped into chaos that a small furry creature was running toward him, arms full of documents, eyes wide with panic. Behind it, two security officers were shouting into communicators. Somewhere deeper in the station, an alarm wailed. "You are the human?" The furry creature gasped, skidding to a stop. "Researcher Danny Reeves? Xenobiology specialist. That's me. I am Milo, your assistant. We must discuss safety protocols immediately. There are 147 pages of required reading before you can begin work. The mortality rate in your department is the highest on this station. Please follow me and do not touch anything." Danny smiled. He liked this one already. Nervous, careful, probably brilliant. "What's with the alarm?" "Feeding time," Milo said grimly. "The gliders become agitated. 3 staff members have died this year alone during feeding rotations. We lost a researcher just last month. She got too close to the barrier, and one of them somehow reached through a gap in the plating. They walked through corridors of gleaming metal and soft blue lighting. Aliens of every shape moved past them. Some stared at Danny with curiosity, others with something like pity. "You know about the Venom gliders, yes?" Milo asked. "I know they're considered the most dangerous creatures in known space." "That is an understatement." Milo stopped a large window. "Look." Danny looked. The containment habitat was massive, filled with artificial rock formations and strange plants. And moving through the air like deadly ribbons of light were the gliders themselves. They were beautiful, roughly the size of Earth eagles, with iridescent scales that shifted colors as they flew. Thin membranous wings caught the artificial light and scattered it like stained glass. One of them slammed against the viewing window. Danny did not flinch. The creature pressed its face against the barrier, mouth open, revealing rows of needle teeth. "Their skin secretes a neurotoxin," Milo explained, voice shaking slightly. "One touch and you die within seconds. Every species we have tested. No exceptions. 12 researchers have been killed studying them over the past century. We observe only through barriers now. No direct contact ever." Danny watched the glider at the window. It was hissing, scales flared, body pressed hard against the transparent surface. But Danny had spent 15 years in the Australian outback handling creatures that could kill with a bite, a sting, a scratch. He had learned to read the language of dangerous animals. And what he saw now made him frown. "Has anyone ever tried being gentle with them?" he asked. Milo stared at him. "Gentle? They're not hunting. Look at the body language. The flared scales, the way they keep checking behind them, how they cluster together in the corners when no one's watching." Danny pointed to a group of gliders huddled near a rock formation. "That's not aggression. That's fear. Fear." Milo's voice was high. "They are apex predators. They fear nothing. Everything fears something." Danny turned away from the window. "I want to go inside." "Inside?" "Inside the habitat." "Yes. That is not possible. That is actually insane. You will die." "Maybe." Danny shrugged. "But I don't think so. Humans have evolved alongside venomous creatures for millions of years. Snakes, spiders, jellyfish, platypus. Our biology is strange. I have a theory that we might be immune." "Might be," Milo repeated weakly. "Only one way to find out." Milo's communicator beeped frantically. He answered it, and his face went pale. "Supervisor Pollux is coming. Someone told them about your arrival and your questions. Please, Researcher Reeves, do not say anything that will get us both terminated." Supervisor Pollux arrived moments later. They were Grathani, tall and crystalline, with 4 arms that moved in constant subtle patterns. Their face was hard to read, but their voice was sharp. "You are the human. Danny Reeves. Pleasure to meet you. I am told you wish to enter the glider habitat. Ido. Then you wish to die." "Not particularly. I wish to understand them. Every predator has patterns. Every dangerous creature has a logic. These gliders have been treated as monsters for decades. Has anyone ever tried treating them as animals? Scared, confused animals torn from their home and locked in a cage." Pollux was silent for a long moment. Their crystalline body caught the light and fractured it into rainbows. "You are either very brave or very stupid," Pollux finally said. "Bit of both, probably. If you die, The paperwork will be extensive. I'll try to stay alive then. For the paperwork, Pollux made a sound that might have been a laugh. Tomorrow, we will discuss protocols. If your theory has any merit, we will consider a controlled test. But understand this, human. Those creatures have killed everyone who has ever touched them. Everyone. You will not be special. Danny looked back at the window. The glider was still there, still watching him. And for just a moment, its scales stopped flaring. Its body relaxed slightly. Maybe not, Danny said softly. But maybe they've just been waiting for someone to try. That night, alone in his quarters, Danny reviewed everything the station had on Venom gliders. Capture reports, death certificates, autopsy files, and one small note buried in the original expedition logs from decades ago. Subjects were removed forcibly from nesting sites. Significant resistance encountered. Multiple eggs destroyed during extraction. Danny closed his eyes. They had stolen them, torn them from their homes, killed their young, and then wondered why they were aggressive. Tomorrow, he would show them something different. Tomorrow, he would show them human. Milo found Danny at the habitat entrance, calmly removing his protective suit. "What are you doing?" Milo's voice came out as a squeak. "The control test is not scheduled until next week. Supervisor Pollux has not approved anything yet." "I know." Danny pulled off his gloves and set them aside. "But I watched the feeding this morning. Those creatures are getting worse. More agitated every day. They need help now, not next week. You cannot just walk in there. Watch me." Milo grabbed his communicator and started shouting for security, for medical, for anyone who would listen. Within minutes, a crowd had gathered. Supervisor Pollux pushed through, their crystalline form flickering with stress patterns Danny had learned to recognize as anger. "Human, step away from that door." "I understand your concern," Danny said calmly, "but I've spent all night studying their behavior. They're not monsters. They're traumatized. Every time someone approaches in those heavy suits with those electric prods, it reminds them of how they were captured. They attack because they expect to be hurt. And you think removing your protection will make them friendly. I think it's worth trying. You will die. Maybe." Danny entered the access code. The door beeped. "But if I'm right, everything we know about these creatures changes. Isn't that worth the risk?" The door slid open. Every glider in the habitat went still. Dozens of iridescent bodies froze in mid-flight, on perches against walls. All of them turned to look at the opening. Danny stepped inside. The door closed behind him. Through the viewing window, he could see Milo covering his eyes. Pollux stood rigid, all four arms pressed against the glass. A medical team was assembling in the corridor, ready to retrieve a body. But Danny wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the gliders. They were beautiful up close. Their scales shifted through colors he couldn't name. Their wings caught the light like living prisms. And their eyes, dark and deep and ancient, watched him with an intelligence that made his breath catch. The first one came at him fast, like a T-dove from a high perch. Wings folded, a missile of venom and teeth aimed directly at his chest. Danny didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't raise his hands or try to run. He simply stood there, breathing slowly, radiating calm. The glider pulled up at the last second. It circled him once, twice, 3 times. Then it landed on his shoulder. Through the window, he heard someone scream. The creature's scales touched his bare neck. He felt a strange, tingling sensation, like mild static electricity. But no burning, no pain, no death. The glider made a confused sound. It pressed harder against his skin, as if trying to make its venom work. Nothing happened. Danny slowly raised his hand and touched its wing. The scales were cool and smooth, like polished stone. The glider shivered but didn't flee. It turned its head and studied him with one dark eye. "Hello," Danny said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." More gliders approached. They landed on his arms, his back, his head. He was covered in creatures that could kill any other being in seconds. And they simply sat there, confused and curious, touching him with their deadly skin and finding only warmth. Then the big one came. The other gliders parted for her. She was larger than the rest, her scales darker, shifting from deep purple to black. Her eyes held something the others lacked. Memory, pain, rage. This was the one who had killed researchers. This was the one they all feared most. She landed on the ground before him. The other gliders went silent. Danny knelt slowly. He made himself small, non-threatening. He extended one hand, palm up, and waited. The creature stared at him. Seconds passed. Minutes. The station had gone completely quiet beyond the glass. Then she moved forward, one slow step at a time. She stretched out her neck and pressed her face against his open palm. And she began to purr. T was a soft sound, almost like humming. Her scales shifted to lighter colors, blues and greens and gentle golds. The tension in her body melted away. Danny felt tears on his face and didn't bother to hide them. "I know," he whispered. "I know what they did to you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The glider pressed closer, and Danny wrapped his arms around her, holding her against his chest like a child seeking comfort. Through the window, Supervisor Pollux stood frozen. Milo had stopped covering his eyes and was now staring with his mouth open. The medical team had lowered their equipment. No one spoke. No one moved. They were watching the impossible. A human, holding a Venom glider in his arms. Alive. Unharmed. Loved. Danny looked up at the window, at all the faces pressed against the glass. "Her name is Whisper," he said, "and she just wants to go home." In the silence that followed, something changed on that station. Something that could never be unchanged. They had called these creatures monsters. But maybe, just maybe, the monsters had been waiting for someone to see them differently. The medical bay was cold and bright, and full of machines Danny didn't recognize. A Fenari doctor moved around him, taking samples, running scans, muttering in a language the translator couldn't quite catch. Milo sat in the corner, still looking like he had seen a ghost. Through the window, Danny could see Supervisor Pollux speaking rapidly to a group of officials. "Your blood is strange," the doctor finally said. "There are compounds in your system that neutralize the toxin on contact. Something in your evolutionary history created a natural defense. Millions of years of living alongside venomous creatures," Danny said. "Snakes, spiders, jellyfish. Our bodies learn to adapt. No other species shows this immunity. None. You're the only beings in the galaxy who can touch a venom glider and survive." The door opened. Pollux entered, followed by a figure Danny hadn't seen before. An Ilkari, tall and imposing in a mobility suit filled with churning water. Their eyes were cold. "Station Commander Oris," Pollux said, their voice carefully neutral. "This is researcher Danny Reeves, the human who just broke every safety protocol on this station." Oris's voice was like grinding gravel. "You could have caused a containment breach. You could have triggered a mass panic. You could have died and left us to explain why we allowed a suicidal mammal into a restricted habitat. But I didn't," Danny said. "And now we know something we never knew before. Humans can interact with the gliders safely. That changes everything about how we study them. It changes nothing. Those creatures are dangerous specimens. They are here for research, not for you to make pets of them." Danny felt his patience thin. They're not specimens. They're intelligent beings who were ripped from their home, watched their eggs get destroyed, and have spent decades trapped in a cage while strangers poke at them with electric prods. Of course they're aggressive. Anyone would be. Oris made a dismissive sound. "You've been here 2 days. You know nothing. I know what I saw in those old records. I know how they were captured. I know that not one person in this station's history has ever tried talking to them, understanding them, treating them like anything other than monsters." The silence that followed was heavy. Pollux stepped forward. "Commander, with respect, the human's discovery is significant. If we can establish communication with the gliders, learn their behavior patterns, perhaps even understand their social structure, it would be the greatest breakthrough in xenobiology in decades." Oris stared at them both for a long moment. Then they turned and left without another word. Milo finally spoke from his corner. "That went well." Over the next weeks, Danny spent every day in the habitat that he learned their names. Not the cold designations the station had given them, but the sounds they made to identify each other. Soft clicks and whistles and hums that he slowly learned to mimic. Whisper stayed close to him always. She followed him like a shadow, landing on his shoulder when he walked, curling around his arm when he sat to make notes. The other gliders watched at first, suspicious, and uncertain. But slowly, one by one, they began to approach. He learned that they groomed each other in the evenings, using their wings to clean scales they couldn't reach themselves. He learned that they played games, chasing each other through the artificial rock formations with a joy that made him smile. He learned that they mourned. When he found an old recording of a glider that had died in captivity years ago, Whisper watched it and made a sound so sad that Danny had to turn it off. They remember, he told Milo during a late-night data review session. They remember everything. Every researcher who hurt them, every egg that was destroyed, every friend they lost. They carry it all. That is remarkable, Milo said. And terrifying. Only if you forget that pain can become trust. If they can remember the bad, they can also remember the good. One evening, Whisper led Danny to a corner of the habitat he had never explored. Behind a carefully arranged pile of artificial rocks, hidden from every camera and every viewing window, she had built a nest. And in that nest were 3 eggs. Danny stared. His heart stopped, started again, pounded in his chest. You've been protecting them, he breathed. All this time. That's why you're always near this corner. That's why you attack anyone who gets close. Whisper made a low sound. She nudged the eggs gently with her nose, then looked at Danny. She was trusting him with the most precious thing she had. I won't tell anyone, Danny promised. Not until we figure out how to keep them safe. But even as he said it, he knew the truth. This station was not safe. These creatures were not safe. And when the commanders found out about those eggs, they would not see new life. They would see more specimens. Danny sat in that hidden corner with Whisper and her eggs, and he began to plan point 3 small lives. 3 futures. And he would protect them, no matter what it cost. The consortium ship arrived without warning. Danny was in the habitat when the announcement came, playing a gentle game with 2 young gliders who had finally learned to trust him. Milo's voice crackled through the communicator with barely controlled panic. You need to come to the conference room. Now, something bad is happening. The conference room was full of tension. Commander Oris stood at the head of the table, and beside them was a creature Danny didn't recognize. Smooth gray skin, too many teeth, eyes that held no warmth. Researcher Reeves, the creature said, smiling in a way that made Danny's skin crawl. I am Director Halvis of the Kelleran Mining Consortium. I have heard fascinating things about your work with our specimens. They're not specimens. Semantics. Halvis waved a hand. The point is, your research has answered a question we have been asking for years. Can Venom gliders be managed? Controlled? Made safe? Danny felt cold. That wasn't the point of my research, but it is the result. You have proven that these creatures can be handled without death, which means they can be eliminated without significant risk to our workforce. The room went silent. Eliminated, Danny repeated. The glider homeworld sits on top of the largest deposit of rare minerals in this sector. We have wanted to mine it for decades, but the wild population made it too dangerous. Now, thanks to you, we know that humans can clear them out for us. Halvis smiled wider. You should be proud. Your discovery will open up resources worth trillions. You want to wipe them out. I want to remove a pest species from valuable land. The specimens here will be euthanized first as a demonstration that the process is safe and effective. Then we will move on to the homeworld. Danny looked at Oris. You're allowing this? The consortium has authority over this station's funding, Oris said, not meeting his eyes. I have no choice. There's always a choice. Not for me. Not anymore. Danny turned and walked out of the room. Halvis called after him, something about cooperation and inevitability, but Danny wasn't listening. Milo caught up with him in the corridor. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, but I'm not letting them touch those gliders. That night, Danny told Pollux everything. About the eggs. About what Halvis planned. About what would happen to an entire species if no one stopped it. Pollux listened in silence, their crystalline form flickering with colors Danny couldn't interpret. You are asking me to betray my superiors, they finally said. I'm asking you to help me save innocent lives. The consortium will not stop. They have money, power, political influence. If you fight them, you will lose everything. I know. Pollux was quiet for a long time. Then they spoke, and their voice was different. Softer, older. I had a clutchmate once. Before I came to this station, they were small and scared, and they trusted me completely. And I failed them. I let the authorities take them for study, and they died alone in a facility not so different from this one. Danny waited. I have carried that guilt for 40 years, Pollux continued. I told myself there was nothing I could have done, that the system was too powerful, the rules too strict. But that was a lie. The truth is, I was afraid, and my fear cost someone I love their life. They turned to face Danny fully, all four arms spread wide. I will not be afraid again. Tell me what you need. The plan came together quickly. Danny would take Whisper and her eggs, steal a shuttle, and reach the glider homeworld before the mining operation began. It was illegal. It was insane. It would probably get him killed or imprisoned for life. He didn't care. Milo agreed to help despite shaking so hard he could barely type. He would manipulate the security feeds, create false departure logs, buy Danny time to escape. Pollux provided the access codes and the shuttle clearance. They would stay behind, claim ignorance, and try to protect Milo if everything went wrong. The night before the escape, Danny sat in the habitat with Whisper. I'm going to take you home, he said. You and your eggs. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Whisper pressed her face against his palm. She made her purring sound, low and steady. The other gliders gathered around them. They couldn't come. The shuttle was too small, the journey too dangerous. But they seemed to understand somehow. They touched Danny one by one, their scales cool against his skin, and made sounds that felt like goodbye. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, Danny would become a criminal, a fugitive, a wanted man across 6 star systems. But as he held Whisper close and felt her heart beating against his chest, he knew it would be worth it. Some things were more important than following rules. Some lives were worth breaking every law in the galaxy to save. The station slept in artificial darkness when Danny made his move. He carried a thermal container under one arm, padded carefully to keep the eggs stable. Whisper rode on his shoulder, her scales dimmed to near black, instinctively hiding them both in the shadows. Security patrol passed Bay 7:30 seconds ago. Milo's voice whispered through his earpiece. You have 4 minutes before the next sweep. Danny moved faster. The shuttle bay was quiet, lit only by emergency strips along the floor. His target sat in the third berth, a small transport vessel, old but reliable, already programmed with false departure logs that showed a routine supply run to a nearby moon. Access code works. Danny breathed as the door slid open. We're in. He settled Whisper in the co-pilot seat and secured the eggs in the cargo hold. She watched him with those dark, ancient eyes, silent but alert. 3 jumps to the homeworld, he said softly. You remember how to call them? The wild ones. Whisper made a low sound. She remembered. The console lit up green. Systems online. Engines warm. Ready for launch. Milo, I need the bay doors. Opening now. Danny, there's a problem. Oris is awake. They're checking the monitoring logs. You need to leave. Right now. Danny hit the throttle. The shuttle shot forward, slicing through the opening doors with barely a meter to spare on either side. Stars exploded into view as they cleared the station's artificial gravity. For one perfect moment, they were free. Then the alarm started. Unidentified vessel. This is Station Command. You are not authorized for departure. Return immediately, or we will be forced to respond. Danny killed the comm link and pushed the engines harder. First jump point in 90 seconds, the navigation computer announced. Behind them, shapes began to detach from the station. Consortium security vessels, fast and armed, streaking toward them like angry hornets. Unidentified vessel. This is your final warning. Yeah, I heard you the first time, Danny muttered. The first shot glanced off their shields, rocking the shuttle sideways. Whisper hissed, her scales flaring with fear and anger. 40 seconds to jump point. Another shot. This one hit harder. Warning lights flashed across the console. Hull integrity dropping. 20 seconds. Whisper stood up on her seat. She stretched her wings wide and pressed them against the viewport, facing the pursuing ships, and she screamed. Not a sound. Something else. Something deeper. A frequency Danny felt in his bones, in his teeth, in the core of his brain. The ships behind them wavered, their pilots momentarily disoriented. Jump point reached. Engaging. Space folded around them. The second jump was rougher. The shuttle was damaged now, trailing sparks and leaking atmosphere from a dozen microfractures. Danny patched what he could with emergency sealant, while Whisper wrapped herself around the egg container, keeping it warm. "One more jump," Danny said. "Can you do this?" The ship groaned. Systems flickered, but the navigation computer held. Third jump, they emerged into chaos. The consortium fleet was already there. 6 massive mining vessels, dozens of smaller security ships, all positioned in orbit around a planet of swirling greens and blues. The glider homeworld. "You are in a restricted zone," a cold voice announced. "Surrender immediately." Danny's hands shook on the controls. The shuttle was barely holding together. They were outnumbered, outgunned, with nowhere to run. Whisper pressed her face against the viewport, staring at her homeworld. She made a sound Danny had never heard before. A song, high and mournful and full of longing. And something answered. The sensors went wild. Contact appearing everywhere. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Rising from the planet's surface like a living tide. Wild Venom gliders. More than Danny could count. More than he had ever imagined could exist. They swarmed upward, filling the space between the shuttle and the consortium fleet. Their scales caught the light of the distant sun and shattered it into impossible colors. The consortium ships tried to retreat, but the gliders were everywhere. They landed on hulls, on sensors on weapon systems. Their toxin ate through external plating, dissolved targeting arrays, disabled engines without ever touching the crews inside. "What are they doing?" Danny whispered. Whisper made her purring sound. They were protecting her. Their lost sister. Their kidnapped daughter. They had felt her call across the void of space, and they had come point one by one. The consortium ships went dark. Stranded. Helpless. Alive, but harmless. Danny guided the damaged shuttle down through the swarm, through the atmosphere, toward the surface of a world no outsider had ever touched. And as they descended, surrounded by thousands of deadly, beautiful creatures, Danny finally understood he hadn't saved them. They had been waiting all along, waiting for someone brave enough to bring their family home. The planet was more beautiful than any world Danny had ever seen. Bioluminescent forests stretched across every continent, glowing in soft blues and greens. Crystal lakes reflected the light of 3 moons. Mountains rose like ancient guardians, their peaks wrapped in clouds that sparkled with strange energies, and everywhere, gliders flew. Danny landed the damaged shuttle in a clearing near a lake. When he opened the door, the wild gliders were waiting. Hundreds of them, perched in trees and on rocks, and floating in the air, all watching him with those deep, intelligent eyes. Whisper emerged slowly, her eggs cradled in her wings. She stepped onto the soil of her homeworld for the first time in decades and made a sound that broke Danny's heart. Joy. Pure, overwhelming joy. The wild ones came to her. They touched her, surrounded her, sang to her in frequencies Danny could barely hear. They were welcoming her home, but they were also watching him. The largest wild glider descended from above. He was massive, nearly twice Whisper's size, his scales ancient and scarred. A patriarch, a king that he landed before Danny and studied him for a long moment. Danny held perfectly still. Then Whisper moved. She pressed herself against Danny's side and made her purring sound, loud and clear. She was vouching for him, telling her people that this human was safe, that he was family. The patriarch leaned forward and touched his face to Danny's palm. All around them, the other gliders relaxed. Some landed on his shoulders. Others brushed against his legs. They accepted him, the only being in the galaxy who could touch them without dying. The only one who had tried to understand. For 3 weeks, Danny lived among them, but he watched Whisper's eggs hatch into 3 tiny creatures with wings too small to fly and voices too weak to sing. He saw her teach them to glide on warm air currents. He learned their language better, their songs and their warnings, and their quiet moments of grief for the ones who had never made it home. But he knew it couldn't last, that on the 22nd day, a ship appeared in orbit. Not a consortium vessel, a neutral transport carrying representatives of the Galactic Council. They landed with shields up and weapons ready, expecting monsters. They found Danny sitting by the lake, surrounded by gliders, playing with 3 babies who kept trying to land on his head. The lead counselor was an ancient being, her species unknown to Danny, her eyes older than stars. "You are the human," she said, "the one who started a war." "I didn't start a war. I brought someone home. The consortium demands your arrest." 6 of their vessels were disabled. Their mining operation has been halted. They claimed damages in the billions. They wanted to wipe out an entire species to dig up rocks. "I think they'll survive the inconvenience." The counselor studied him, studied the gliders, studied the 3 babies now wrestling over Danny's shoelaces. "There will be a trial," she finally said. But public opinion has shifted. A researcher named Milo released documentation of everything. The capture methods, the deaths, the eggs destroyed during extraction. The galaxy knows what was done to these creatures now. Danny felt something loosen in his chest. Milo. Brave, terrified, brilliant Milo. The consortium's mining rights have been suspended pending investigation. And Supervisor Pollux has testified before the council about glider sapience. They made quite an impression. What happens now? Now we decide what to do with a species that can kill with a touch and a human who seems to be their only friend. The counselor almost smiled. The suggested sentence for your crimes is permanent exile to this planet, as official liaison and protector of the glider population. Danny looked at Whisper. She was watching him, her scales shimmering with soft golds and greens. "I think I can live with that." The counselors left. The consortium ships eventually retreated, and Danny stayed, that he built a small shelter by the lake and spent his days learning and documenting and playing with creatures the galaxy had called monsters. Milo visited sometimes, bringing supplies and updates and nervous laughter. Pollux came once, stayed for a week, and left with something like peace in their crystalline heart. But mostly, it was just Danny and the gliders. Years past point one evening, Danny sat on a cliff overlooking the bioluminescent forest. He was older now, gray in his hair, lines on his face. But his eyes were the same, calm and patient and full of wonder. A shadow passed over him. Whisper landed at his side, and 3 young gliders tumbled after her. Her children, fully grown now, curious about the strange wingless creature their mother loved so much. "Evening, family," Danny said. Whisper pressed her face against his palm. She made her purring sound, soft and steady, the same sound she had made on that first day. When everything had changed, he wrapped his arm around her and watched the sun set over a world that should have been filled with death, but was instead filled with life. The galaxy had warned him never to touch a Venom glider. They forgot to warn the gliders not to touch him back. And in the end, that made all the difference.